Hey, I'm Hope Darst, and this is my CCM Magazine Spotlight. My story is really funny. I was 19. I was at college in Louisiana, totally just kind of running from the Lord, like was saved, but definitely didn't understand lordship. And like, oh, wait, being saved means I actually have to give my whole life to Jesus, like all of my plans, all of my dreams, everything. And I moved to Nashville for the summer, and I just had that God moment where like I was fully arrested by the Spirit of the Lord. And it was, okay, I'm all in. Like I'm not holding anything back. And my mom drives her crazy because I'll be like, I don't know about what it looks like when I prayed that prayer at 5, but I know at 19 it became real, and she's always like, but you were saved at 5. And I'm like, well, I sealed the deal at 19 with the Lord either way. And it was a marking moment. It changed my whole life because it did change the reason that I did everything, the purpose behind everything, my motives, why I made decisions. And I ultimately moved here because I felt like I didn't know how to follow Christ well. And I wanted to get plugged into that church where God had just kind of captured my heart and changed my life. So I packed my little Honda. I dropped out of college, which I don't recommend to anyone. I have 2 teenage daughters. I'm like, you will go to college. But I think my parents knew that God just had like this path for me that was uniquely different. And they really supported me moving to Nashville, coming here. I think because they always knew in the back of their mind, like, she's going to pursue music anyway. So we're just delaying the inevitable. So like I said, I packed my Honda, moved here, and I plugged in to my home church, and I didn't have a plan other than just, God, show me what to do next. I really want to know how to follow you faithfully. And I hope that music is a part of that journey. And it just did not go the way that I thought it would go. I thought I could just walk down the street or like be in a bathroom of a restaurant, just be like singing a song really well, and somebody would hear it, be like, you're the next star, sign a record deal, and all my dreams would come true. Like I was so naive to how the music business worked. And, I came from a small town. No one I knew had ever done music. So I just had no concept of what that was like. And so as a result, like I just got normal jobs, and I was trying to figure out like how to break in and be a background singer or something. Like I just didn't really know what I was doing. And in that process, like I was always faithful to be at my church, always faithful to serve there. And it was through that I ended up getting connected with Natalie Grant's management team. And they reached out and they were like, hey, will you come sing backgrounds on the road with Natalie Grant? And yes, like someone on his management team went to the church that I went to who would just see me faithfully serving on the worship team. Like I wasn't pursuing really anything truly because I didn't know how. That ended up leading to me, that connection and that relationship, going on the road with Natalie and doing that for several years. And I thought that would like somehow be my big break into the industry. And I came off the road after like 2 years of doing that with Natalie. I was engaged to get married, and I felt like, okay, this is the time. Like, I'm going to come off the road. I'm going to like go pursue being an artist. I feel like I understand the, music industry. And sure enough, on my 25th birthday, the Lord and I are having a conversation, and he's like, that's not the plan I have for you. And I'm devastated. I'm like, what? Like, this is all I've ever known. I think this is what you've created me to do. But that little prayer at 19 of like, God, you have all my plans, you have all my dreams. Like it was coming to a moment where God was putting that to test. Like, did I really mean it? And I felt like the Lord asked me to like lay down that dream in that season and to really let it go and to trust him with my future. And so I did. I stopped pursuing music, got another like job at a bridal store selling wedding dresses, and just began to pursue being in my local church and serving the local church and really just going, God, I don't know what you have next for me, but I do trust that you will show me what that path is going to look like. It was crazy. Over the next year of that process, my husband and I were really praying because at that point I was like, well, what do I need to do? Do I need to go back to school, get an education? I was really asking the Lord, like, what is the path for my future? I'm 25 years old, so I know I have a lot of life in front of me. And it was crazy. Like over the next year, I just began to sense that God was actually calling me into vocational ministry, but I didn't know what that looked like because I grew up in an era where women were not worship leaders and they weren't on staff at church as worship leaders. So I have no context for that, no box for that, for what we see now in worship. So it wasn't a picture that I had in my mind. And crazy enough, at the end of that year of us like really praying, we were married at this point, my husband and I, and uh, we felt like God was saying, "I'm going to call you into vocational ministry." And in 1 week's time, I got 3 calls from 3 different churches who knew nothing about what was going on, just saying, "Hey, would you consider moving, coming on staff, being a worship leader at our church, helping, run the worship department, disciple people?" And I was like, "This is a confirmation. Like, God, you're calling me into this." We didn't feel called to move from Nashville. We really felt we were supposed to be here. And so I remember going to my pastors at my own church and saying, "This is what's happening. I feel like God's in this, but I don't know what to do. We don't feel called to move." And 24 hours later, my home church said, "We want to bring you on staff here instead." And that became my life. That was the next decade of my life. Being married, having babies, raising kids, and literally just being in the nitty-gritty, day in, day out life of building the local church, serving your community, making disciples, sharing the gospel, printing out lyrics, making sure PCO is working and people are showing up to church and doing Bible studies with people. That's all I did. I wasn't writing. I didn't really have a concept of songwriting. Again, I grew up in an era where so many female singers didn't write their own songs. Worship was just coming on to the kind of, scene with the Chris Tomlin kind of Phil Wickham Hillsong right about that same time that I was stepping into this world. So it was all very new, different for me, and I was just like everyone else, I feel like in the early 2000s, I was leading Shout to the Lord and, all the other songs that everybody else, Amazing Grace, My Chains Are Gone, like all of it. And I was so happy and so fulfilled. But around 2013, 2014, something began to shift in my heart. And I didn't know what was going on, but I could feel it was like, the longer you walk with the Lord, you can just start to sense seasons of transition, even if you don't know what that transition is going to be or what it's going to look like. And that year, I did start to kind of like dabble in some songwriting. I wasn't good and I did not know what I was doing, but I think there was like a deep thing inside of me that wanted to express this relationship that I had forged with the Lord over a long period of time in the place that I felt most called to, but I didn't know how. I mean, I was just stumbling my way in the dark trying to figure that out. That year became one of the most significant years of my life, 2013. That transition ultimately led that my husband and I really felt like the Lord was calling me to come off staff at that church that we were at. It really just felt like a step of faith. It was not because anything was wrong or bad. We just literally felt like the Lord was like, "I have a new season for you guys, and it's going to require leaving your current place and really going in to a new season, not having all the answers, not having all the clarity, but literally just going with my presence, going with the fact that I have a word for you and you're going to follow it." So I ended up coming off staff, and we ended up about 6 weeks later visiting this gathering of people in a basement in Franklin, Tennessee with a Aussie couple that I'd never met before. And we walked into their basement for just a gathering of like 12 people. And it completely changed the trajectory and the course of my life. It was Henry and Alex Seeley. They were there facilitating just these nights of worship and the word. And I remember when we left that first night looking at my husband and I said, "I don't know what that was, but I know that that's tied to our future. And I can't put my finger on it." I mean, because you got to think, it's 12 people in a basement. At that point, that's all it was. We had no idea that 10 years later, that would be known as the Belonging Company that would have songs and records that go all around the world. We didn't know that then. We just were going off of what we felt like the Lord was sensing. But as we made that transition, Henry Seeley actually ended up inviting me to eventually be a part of the worship team. And then a couple of years later, when we were actually a church and he felt like it was the season for us to start writing songs as a body of believers, he invited me into that process, which I was like, "You're crazy. You have no business inviting me into a songwriting like moment because I don't have any skill set for this." But man, it goes to show that like when leaders choose to look at people's lives and go, "I'm going to pull the gold out of you instead of focusing on what you don't have. I'm going to focus on something that I see in the spirit on your life." And he knew, he was like, "You don't have a track record of being a songwriter, but I think there's something in you that God wants to pull out of you as a songwriter. And because of that, because of his just pastoring and willingness to believe in me, coupled with people like Mia Fields, you had this moment where I was able to go in and write songs for the church. Much like David in Psalms, you cannot separate yourself from the personal journey that you are walking out with the Lord. It wouldn't be authentic if we did. But there's also this very weighty responsibility to make sure that you are leading people both to know the truth of God's word, to know the truth of God's nature, and to ultimately put the focus on him and not just yourself. And so it's been a balancing act for me of going, I want to write honest, authentic lyrics that are true to the journey of life that the believer actually is walking through, and put word and music to all of those things, but never from a place where get to the end of the song and everything was about you. I always want somewhere in there weaved is the hope and the promise and the power of Jesus and who he is, and why I'm able to say, this is where I'm at, but this is where I'm going to land because of you. And I think you have both, right? You're going to always have worship songs that are very like vertical. They are only to exalt the name of Jesus. They are only like everything is about who you are and your name. And we have to have those. I think they should be the majority of the songs that we're singing. But I think we would be not telling the whole story of the journey of what worship is to the believer if there weren't also songs that are coupled with real life language that's tied in to the places of, I'm going to have to hope. I'm going to have to sing my way through this thing. I'm going to have to worship through the fear or the worry and remind myself of who God is and what he's promised me. And when they're mashed together, I think you get this whole picture of what worship is. I've always just been a lover of music in general. My dad was just so instrumental in giving me this love for music of all kinds. Growing up, I was listening to everything from the Oak Ridge Boys to Dolly Parton to, Michael W. Smith and Amy Grant. It was such a wide spectrum of the music that he introduced me to. And then obviously classics too, like the Beatles and, Nat King Cole. And it was a beautiful, smorgasbord of music in my home. And it made me a lover of music. So you couple that with your faith, I became such a lover of Christian music. I mean, I can remember so vividly being in high school and driving to our local tiny Christian bookstore that was about the size of a closet. And I would sit on the floor and I would literally, they'd have this one little rack of all this current singles or the current, top Christian songs. And I would sit there in my little, cassette player and I would listen to them over and over and over. Eventually I would buy them and then I would sing the solo on Sunday for offering. But I was such a lover of it because I loved music. And when you could take the excellence and the artistry of music and you could couple it with our faith and the truth of God's word, to me, it was everything that I hoped music could be, that it was life-giving and that it was hopeful and that it actually was transformative, but it wasn't sacrificing something musically that felt exciting and appealing and that you wanted to listen to. And so I think, yeah, that was a part of what was happening over those years. But there is a difference in how you write as an artist and how you write as a worship leader. They are completely different. And I find when I made my first two records, I was really trying to figure out what that would look like because I had only ever written as a worship leader for the local church. I hadn't written as an artist. And I remember making that first record and even my EP and wrestling with how do I balance this and how do I somehow figure out how to make a record that feels worshipful, but it also has artistry. And it was a tension. I don't think I mastered it by any means. But it's also why when I pivoted and I have a new album that's a live worship album, all of the way that I wrote from that album is completely different than the way that I wrote for the first two projects. And I think having the right people in the room makes a massive difference. I find it is significantly different to be in a room with people who are either worship leaders or they serve on a worship team in their local church and they really write for congregational worship versus trying to write with a group of people that's not their wheelhouse. You definitely can feel that your instincts, like your gut just targets that they are an intangible, unspeakable thing can be different. And I know when I was writing this record, I was very purposeful to put worship leaders, musicians who play on their worship teams, people who lead worship, people who I've led worship with for many, many years. They were the people that I gravitated to write with because I knew we don't have to talk about what the goal is. It's something that's deeper inside of us that we are trying to write songs that everyone in the room can sing, not just one person can deliver. And I think those are the two major differences. I think you feel it all. I think to say you don't or you do is not true. I think, and it's on any given day, right? Like most days, I know for me, most days I'm not looking at those numbers, but if I were looking at those numbers, because it does come out come up in the business of it, I'll just kind of usually just be like, I can't believe that song connected with people to that degree. That blows my mind. Partly because I didn't even think it was a good song to begin with. I almost didn't cut it because I thought this song is so hard to sing. No one's going to be able to sing this song thinking congregationally. So it proves that I did not know what I was doing. And I'm so grateful for people around me who could say, yeah, this is a good song. So yeah, it's a wild thing to watch a song connect at that level with people and that far and that wide. But I think too, the longer you're in the business, there's this weird tension that you're always wrestling with because on one side, the more you understand just about music business on any genre and any place, it's really hard for a song to cut through it all these days. It's really hard for a song to go kind of past the influx of literally hundreds of thousands of songs that are being uploaded to DSPs and a song cut through and actually connect with people, especially someone like me at the beginning. I was unknown. No one who knew who I was. It wasn't like I had this, long-standing career that a song could explode that way. It was just the power of a song. I think my hope is that the longer I do this and the more I do it, the more I just get comfortable with the reality of you can't predict it. You can't manufacture it. You can't go, this song's going to work and this song's going to not. And you also can't get upset when it doesn't. Because really, at the end of the day, my job is to steward the thing that's in front of me right then and to do that thing that day to the best of my ability to bring God glory. So that's when I'm showing up in the writing room, I'm trying to be the best co-writer I can be, but I'm also trying to just be the best Christian I can be in that room. Sensitive, kind, compassionate, thoughtful, no ego. I'm also having to think about that when I look at those streaming numbers. Can I be compassionate? Can I have no ego? Can I not be jealous? It never changes, right? Whether it's looking at the song, being a songwriter, being a mom, washing clothes, showing up on a stage, leading worship, driving in carpool, I'm just constantly trying to go, all of this is worship. And all of this is meant to be done in a way that God gets honor from. And so that's both the forward facing and the things that no one sees. And I think that at the end of the day, all we can do is try to live all of that out to the best of our ability. And when we get it wrong, try to do better the next time, I think it is definitely a testament to the timing of God. And I always kind of laugh about this. And even people that are close to me, we always laugh because I drug my feet for a year not wanting to record the song because it was already huge. My church had released it. And gosh, that version is just so amazing. And I'm so proud of that version that went out into the whole world, into the world with Lauren singing it. So there was a weird sense in me. I was like, we don't really need to do it again. I didn't have this overwhelming sense that it needed to happen. And when Mia Fields, my co-writer, came to me and she was like, I really think this song was always meant to go further. I think it was meant to go to radio. I think it was meant to have this whole other life to it. And no one has done it. And you're probably going to think I'm crazy, but I literally think the Lord has said, you are supposed to do it. And he's reserved it and saved it for you for this moment. And I was like, No. At the time, I'm not a published songwriter, I'm not an artist, I'm none of those things, so that doesn't really make sense just in the natural. But she really was strong, and I couldn't shake what she had said, and as I began to pray about it, my husband and I began to pray about it, but I drug my feet for a year on that, and then finally recorded it, and then even when I recorded it, was like, "I don't know, da, 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 da." Like, so I say all that because, we think we're in control of our timing, and we're not. Like, all of that dragging it out led to it coming out exactly when it was meant to come out, almost 4 years after the original. Like, when you look on the just timeline of how music business works, none of that makes sense. Like, there is not a single part of that that falls into, like, a normal rhythm, and I always chuckle just kind of internally being like, "God, just when I think that I, like, have some control over this timing, you ultimately have the most perfect timing, because this wasn't about me. This wasn't about me starting a career. This wasn't about me having some huge hit song, even though you used all of those things to be a part of my journey. Ultimately, like, I think God just was like, I have a time in history that this song is going to minister to so many of my kids, and that means more to me than worrying about your timeline and when you think it's right, when you think it's wrong. And I'm so grateful God does that, because, man, like, it's just a good reminder that even when we mess up the timing in our mind, God can still and is probably going to use it in His perfect timing. And we just don't have that much power over it. The amount of people that have shared over the years, kind of, I've seen a real consistency of, like, moms saying, "This is the only song that I can play at night that brings peace to my kids to get them to sleep in the nursery," even older kids. And then there's this kind of consistency with people being in the hospital with loved ones and people that are sick, and this song really just ministering to their families and what is just such a difficult, hard time. And then there's the part of the song that has really just touched so many people who have struggled with worry and anxiety, like I have, throughout the years, and that this song became such a anchor for them and a weapon of worship to remind themselves, like, despite all of the fear and the chaos that I'm feeling, there is actually a greater promise that I can grab onto, that God speaks peace over my life, that God's promises peace, that peace is actually bigger and different than just my feelings. Peace is Jesus. He's actually the Prince of Peace, and He lives with me and He dwells with me. And I can actually have internal peace even when everything around me is just a mess and chaotic. And isn't that the power and the promise of Jesus, right? That He comes in and He brings hope and joy and peace that doesn't make sense, but still somehow anchors us and carries us in the craziest parts of life. And it has just been so beautiful to watch God do a good work through this song. It's not about me, it's about Him and what He's been able to do. It just feels like such an honor and a privilege, honestly, like, to just be able to share the gospel of Jesus through this very unique lane that I feel like I was created to do. Uh, you know, I I can't honestly imagine doing anything else with my life other than sharing the gospel through music. It's just what I'm hardwired for. And trust me, I tried to do a lot of different other jobs over the years, but this is just the thing. Like, I think about this movie. Some people will know it. It's called Chariots of Fire. And this guy has this famous line. The main character, he says, "When I run, I feel the pleasure of God." And I feel like I'm getting emotional, but, like, getting getting to talk about who God is through the power of music. It's the place that I feel the most connected to God and the most humbled by who He is, and also the most passionate about delivering the hope of Jesus to people. Oh my gosh, I'm so emotional now. It's such an honor and it's such a privilege. And if Mighty Name of Jesus, if this song goes all around the world and it does something incredible, that's awesome, because that means that the gospel of Jesus and the hope of Jesus and the ability to give people a song that can be an anchor in their lives and their homes, that reminds them of the power of Jesus's name, the power and the victory that we have in Him. Yes, because that's ultimately what I feel called to do, is to get into people that hope and that promise of who God is. But even if the song does nothing else, or if I never have another song, it ultimately, like, it's a terrible driver for you for that to be the goal. It's not kingdom minded to begin with, but also it'll just mess you up internally and get all of your motives and your reasons for doing it off course. I remember when we decided to make this new record, a live worship record, it was not to the advice of a lot of people in my world, because I don't know if people know this, but live worship records are typically like double, triple the cost of a studio record. They're so expensive because now if you're going to do a live record, you have to, like, why do it and not have visuals to go with it, right? Because we're such a visual industry now. But that means double, triple the cost of just making music and then maybe like making one video. Now, if you have a record of 12 songs, you're making a live experience for the whole thing. And I remember my some of my team being like, on paper, this financially does not make sense. Like, you should just go make another studio record. Don't spend a lot of money. And, let's just keep moving forward. And I remember I kept praying, I kept praying, I kept praying and asking the Lord, like, well, I don't want to just make another record to make another record. Like, I mean, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it because I have a word from you. I have a vision from you of what you're asking me to do. And I just kept hearing God say, go back to the basics. Go back to the beginning of who you are and how I've created you, and do this the way that is the most authentic to you. And I knew immediately that meant a live worship record. And I remember having a conversation with my husband one night, and I just said, this is going to be more money than it makes sense to do. I said, but I can't bring myself to do anything else. This is the only thing that I have a conviction and a real like sense from the Lord, and it feels like obedience. And I said, we're going to have to make a decision that it's worth the investment, even if this album in the natural will look like a failure to everyone else. I was like, I have to know I'm going into this going, it doesn't matter what it looks like on paper and the industry. Like, if it's just a total flop, right? Do we still feel a conviction from the Lord that this is what we're supposed to offer to the Lord in the season? And I'll never forget my husband looking at me and he goes, yep. I said, because it's all a sacrifice and it's all an offering. And we never bring sacrifices and offerings to the Lord based on success or failure. We bring them out of obedience and commitment to doing the thing that God's asked us to do. And that has become the most anchoring thing for me in this industry, to go, I can't get caught up in whether I'm doing this for it to be a success or a failure, because it's just a terrible metric. Because honestly, in this business, most things are a failure. Like, most things don't work. So if you look at that, like, you wouldn't do half the things that we do. And so there has to be a deeper conviction. There has to be something else that's driving this thing. Otherwise, I could go do a different job that's a lot less stressful and has a lot less, failure potential in the eyes of, people. And I just am so grateful to my husband for that wisdom in this season, because I have felt so strongly that this was the right decision for this time, regardless of how it does or doesn't do. It doesn't really matter, because I felt like this was the thing that God asked me to do. And ultimately, that is the most successful thing that I can do. And so as a result, there's a live worship record, and I couldn't be more thrilled. I think it's the most honest representation of who I am. If you're a parent, you'll know what this means. Like, you have lots of kids and you love all your kids different because they're all uniquely different. But some of your kids just like look a little more like you, and they act a little bit more like you. They have more of your mannerisms. And I think that's true of albums. Like, they're all your kids. You love them all the same. But sometimes there's an album that just looks more like you and it sounds more like you. And it just is like this more like picture of you than maybe some of the other ones. And I think that's true of this new live worship record. Hey, I'm Hope Darst, and you have just watched my Spotlight with CCM Magazine. And I would love for you guys to check out my brand new song, Mighty Name of Jesus, everywhere you listen to music. It's out now, and you can pre-save my brand new album, In the Mighty Name, coming April 18th. I hope these songs bless you.